The air was thick with the stale scent of cigarette smoke and despair. In the cracked leather booth of Mickey's diner, the kind of place where dreams went to die in weak coffee and cold fries, two men sat in silence, each nursing a mug of something that barely passed for caffeine. "You ever think about what life would be like if we weren't born broke?" Jay muttered, swirling the black liquid like it held some kind of answer. Chris didn't look up. His fingers drummed the chipped formica table, the same rhythm they'd fallen into since high school, restless, quick, barely controlled. Every day they had grown up side by side in a South Side neighborhood where broken streetlights outnumbered working ones, and ambition was just another word for trouble. School had been a joke, jobs came and went, and now, in their 30s, they were both drowning. Chris was 3 months behind on rent. Jay had just lost his third delivery job in a year. The eviction notice on his apartment door felt more like a countdown than a warning. They didn't talk about dreams anymore. They talked about debt. "I owe Marcus $7,000, Jay finally said, leaning back. His voice was low, flat, like he was reciting a weather report. "He said I've got 2 weeks to come up with it, or... Well, you know Marcus." Chris winced. Everyone knew Marcus, the kind of guy who smiled while breaking your kneecaps. "Why'd you even borrow from him?" "Thought I had a sure thing. Investment in a weed farm out in Colorado. Buddy said the returns were insane. Turned out the farm was just 3 dead plants in a garage." Chris snorted, though nothing was funny. Figures. Jay looked around, making sure no one was eavesdropping. The diner was nearly empty, save for a couple of old guys arguing about the lottery and a waitress scrolling through her phone behind the counter. Jay leaned in. "Look, I didn't tell you everything." Chris raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Jay hesitated, licking his lips like the words tasted bitter. "I know where there's a stash, 100,000. Real cash. No bank accounts, no paper trail. Just bills in a duffel bag." Chris's body tensed. "You what?" "I did a job last year," Jay continued, voice even lower now. "Nothing major. Just a lookout gig. Some guys were jacking a safe house, drug money. It got messy and I bailed early. Thought they got caught. But last week, one of them called me. He's doing 10 years upstate, and he's got cancer. Terminal. He told me where the stash is hidden. Said he doesn't want it going to waste." Chris's eyes were wide. "And you believe him? He's got nothing to gain by lying now." Silence settled between them again. Heavy as concrete, Chris leaned back, processing. "So what? You gonna just go grab it?" Jay nodded slowly. "I was thinking, maybe we could do it together. You help me get it. Split it 50-50. Chris let out a low whistle. 50,000 each. His mind started racing. What he could do with that kind of money. Pay off his debts, move his mom to a better neighborhood, maybe even start that detailing shop he used to dream about. But something didn't sit right. "Where is it?" "In a locker, abandoned train depot down by the river." Chris frowned. "And no one's guarding it." Jay smirked. "Been sitting there over a year. No one knows it's there except me. And now you." Chris tapped his mug again. "This sounds like a trap." Jay shrugged. "Could be, but it's a risk I'm willing to take. I'm dead either way if I don't pay Marcus." Chris looked out the window. Rain had started falling, slow and steady. He remembered being 10 years old, riding bikes with Jay through those same streets, dodging potholes and pretending they were escaping the cops. They used to talk about getting out, being somebody. Now here they were, still running, but toward danger instead of away from it. "I'll think about it," Chris said finally. Jay nodded, his eyes hardening. "Don't think too long." They left the diner without another word, their footsteps echoing in the wet night. 2 friends, 2 futures, and somewhere between them, a bag of money that could either save their lives or destroy them both. Chris couldn't sleep. 3 nights in a row, the image of that duffel bag, stuffed with stacks of rubber-banded bills, kept dancing behind his eyes like a ghost he couldn't ignore. $50,000. It was more money than he'd ever seen in one place, and it was just there, waiting to be taken. But the more he thought about it, the less he liked the idea of splitting it. Jay was reckless, loud. He'd get drunk and flash cash at some strip club and get them both killed. Chris had always been the quiet one, the thinker. Jay had jokes, Chris had plans. And this time, he had a plan that would solve everything. All it would take was one more lie. 2 days later, they hit the road in Jay's beat-up silver Corolla, a bag of snacks in the back seat, a .38 pistol under Chris's jacket. "You sure it's still there?" Chris asked, trying to sound casual as they passed through the cracked back roads outside of the city. "Positive," Jay grinned. "Locker 17B. The guy gave me the combo. Said it's behind a bunch of old crates at the depot." Chris nodded, eyes on the road. He'd picked the route. Said it was faster, less traffic. Jay didn't question it. He never questioned Chris. They drove for hours through the kind of empty land that makes a man feel like he doesn't exist. Abandoned gas stations, miles of cornfields, no cameras, no people. Perfect. As dusk settled in, Chris pulled off onto a dirt path leading into the woods. "What's this?" Jay asked, puzzled. "Shortcut," Chris said. "Depot's just across the ridge. I figured we could hike the last mile, avoid any eyes." Jay squinted through the windshield. "Looks sketchy, bro. You want the money or not?" Jay hesitated. Then, grinning like a kid on a treasure hunt, he popped the passenger door open. "Let's do it." They walked about 15 minutes into the woods, dusk bleeding into night. Jay kept checking his phone for a signal. Chris knew there wouldn't be one. Not here. When they reached a small clearing, Chris stopped. It was silent. No birds, no wind, just the creak of branches and Jay's voice breaking the stillness. "Yo, where's the depot?" Chris pulled the pistol from his jacket. Jay froze. "Chris, what the hell are you doing?" Chris didn't answer. His heart thundered in his chest. He aimed, hands trembling slightly. Jay stepped back. "Chris, wait. We can talk about this, man. This isn't you. You don't have to." Chris fired. The shot echoed through the trees like a slap across the sky. Jay crumpled instantly, falling face first into the dirt, eyes wide, unmoving. Chris stared at the body for a long time, long enough to feel the weight of it all press down on him. Then he dropped the gun, took a shaky breath, and got to work. He had gloves, a tarp, a shallow grave dug under a rotting tree stump just like the tutorials had shown online. It took an hour to finish, but when he was done, the forest was quiet again, like nothing had ever happened. Chris wiped the sweat from his brow and walked back to the car, his pulse finally slowing. Tomorrow he would drive to the train depot alone. He'd open the locker, take the money, and disappear. No witnesses, no partners, just $100,000 and a new life. As he pulled back onto the main road, the weight in his chest began to lift. He didn't feel guilt. He felt free. 3 days after Jay disappeared, the questions started. First, it was his sister calling Chris. "Have you seen Jay? He's not answering. Said he was going to get some money from a friend. That was the last I heard." Chris had rehearsed his answers. "Yeah, we were supposed to meet, but he never showed. Figured he just took off. You know how Jay is." But Jay wasn't like that. Not anymore. He may have been reckless, but he never ghosted family. And when a week passed with no texts, no calls, and no signs of life, Jay's sister reported him missing. Detective Rachel Dorsey picked up the case. She'd worked the South Side beat long enough to know when something smelled wrong, and this reeked. Jay's phone went dark the night of the supposed trip. No bank activity, no calls, no social media, just nothing. But Chris was still in town, still working his part-time garage job like nothing had happened, still driving Jay's old Corolla. That was the first red flag. Dorsey showed up at Chris's door one muggy afternoon. He opened it with a calm smile, but she noticed the twitch in his eye, the quick breath. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. Chris shrugged. "Sure. But like I told the other officer, I haven't seen Jay since last week." "Right," Dorsey said, stepping inside. "Mind if I ask where you two were headed the day he vanished?" Chris didn't flinch. "Supposed to take a trip out near the river. Talk about a business idea. He bailed last minute." She nodded, but her eyes wandered, scanned the room, landed on a mud-streaked duffel bag half hidden behind a chair. She made no comment, just kept mental notes. "You know what's funny?" she said as she turned back toward him. Jay's sister said you two were going to check out a property near the train depot. Chris froze for half a second. Just long enough. He recovered. Yeah, that's what I meant. River, depot, it's all out that way. Dorsey smiled politely. Sure. 2 days later, the cops showed up again, this time with a warrant. They found Jay's phone in a storage container in Chris's garage, wrapped in foil. Rookie mistake. They found the gun under the floorboards of his bedroom closet, still smelling faintly of burnt metal. But what sealed it was the dash cam. Chris had forgotten Jay's Corolla had one. A cheap model, but it still worked. It didn't capture the killing, but it recorded their drive into the woods, time-stamped and GPS logged. Only Chris returned on the video. Alone. In the interrogation room, Chris tried to keep calm. Dorsey slid the photos across the table, Jay's car, the dash cam footage, the GPS route, the phone, the gun. You were careful, she said, but not careful enough. Chris stared down at the table, jaw tight. You don't have a body. No, she agreed. But we've got motive, opportunity, and a digital trail a mile long. You killed your best friend for money, and now you're done. Chris stayed silent, but inside, panic swelled like a tidal wave. They were right. He'd buried Jay in the woods, deep enough to fool animals, but not time. He thought he was smarter, thought if he planned enough he could outrun guilt and evidence both. But he forgot one thing. People don't just vanish, not without someone noticing, not without the past clawing its way back to the surface. The next morning, Chris was booked on suspicion of murder. No bail. As the prison doors slammed behind him, the weight of what he'd done finally settled. He had the money, but now he had no freedom, not yet. But he wasn't done fighting, not even close. Greenford State Penitentiary was less a prison and more a battlefield surrounded by concrete. Chris knew the second he stepped past the steel gates that this wasn't the kind of place people walked out of unchanged, if they walked out at all. The air stank of sweat, mold, and blood that no one bothered to clean. The walls were cracked, the guards indifferent, and the inmates were hungry for power, respect, and revenge. Day one, Chris learned the rule: pick a side or become prey. But Chris wasn't built like the others. He had no gang, no tattoos, no representative. All he had was a murder charge, a bag of hidden money, and a face that hadn't yet learned how to look dangerous. He was fresh meat, and the wolves smelled it. His first cellmate was a hulking skinhead named Digger, in for a triple homicide. Digger never said much, just stared. At night, he carved things into the wall with a sharpened spoon. When Chris tried to talk, Digger looked at him like a bug crawling too close. On his third day, Chris made the mistake of sitting in the wrong seat at breakfast. A tray was slapped from his hands, and 2 members of the Red Fangs, a prison gang known for their brutality, shoved him face first into his food. Laughter echoed through the mess hall. The guards watched. Did nothing. You don't belong here, one of the Fangs hissed. But you will. By week 2, Chris had bruises on his ribs and a split lip. He learned to sleep with one eye open and eat faster than anyone else. He spoke less, moved less, observed everything. But it was the older inmates that taught him survival. One, an ex-lawyer doing time for fraud, gave Chris the best advice: stay invisible or become useful. Chris chose the latter. He started fixing things, mending torn shirts, trading favors, passing quiet messages between rival groups. He became known as Ghost, the guy who never talked but always knew, and slowly the beatings stopped. But power has a price. One night, a guard named Rollins pulled Chris aside. He was young, lean, and wore authority like a mask he enjoyed ripping off. "You've been getting friendly in here," he said, smiling without warmth. "That means you owe me." "Owe you what?" "Information, contraband, names. You don't feed me something, I'll make sure your next cellmate's not as polite as Digger." Chris nodded, playing the game. "I'll let you know if I hear anything." But he didn't trust Rollins. No one did. The guy played all sides, sold favors for cigarettes and pain. Chris wasn't stupid. He knew guards like him were more dangerous than the inmates. So he bought time, made allies, waited. He even approached Rafi, leader of the Red Fangs, offering to help him smuggle burner phones through laundry bins. Rafi agreed, but only if Chris proved loyalty. "Next time someone steps to us," Rafi said, "you handle it." No hesitation. Chris hesitated, then said, "Okay." A week later, Chris was in the yard when another inmate, skinny, loud, and clearly new, bumped into one of Rafi's boys. The tension rose immediately. Chris stepped in. One punch, one warning. He didn't kill the guy, but he made sure the fangs saw blood. Rafi nodded from across the yard. Chris was in. But something inside him cracked that day. He had crossed a line, become part of the system he once feared. Still, he told himself it was necessary. It was survival. Because Chris wasn't planning to rot in Greenford forever. He was planning to leave. One way or another, Chris had been planning the escape for 3 months. Not just daydreaming like the rest of the lifers, but charting guard rotations, noting blind spots in the yard cameras, and keeping track of every shift change that occurred during a storm. And most importantly, he had a partner, Leon Stitch Morales, a wiry, sharp-eyed inmate who worked in the infirmary and had a knack for slipping past notice. Stitch was in for armed robbery, but everyone knew he'd broken out of 2 smaller prisons before getting caught. Most thought he was just lucky. Chris knew better. Stitch was a ghost. They struck a quiet deal one night during laundry duty. "You got money on the outside?" Stitch asked, folding a damp sheet. Chris nodded. "More than you'll ever need." Stitch's lips curled into a grin. "Then let's stop wasting time." The plan hinged on 3 things: timing, trust, and rain. Rain meant chaos. Storms meant electrical surges, spotty surveillance, guards scrambling to keep order. Greenford's outdated security systems always flickered during storms, and that was their window. It came on a Thursday. Thunder cracked the sky open like a shotgun blast. The yard flooded in minutes, and sirens wailed as units were pulled inside. That was step 1. Step 2, Chris faked a seizure during count. He hit the floor, spasming, eyes rolled back. It was convincing enough to draw shouts from inmates and curses from the guards. One of them called for med transport. Stitch, conveniently on infirmary duty, rolled in with a stretcher. "He's seizing bad," Stitch said. "Could be bleeding in the brain. We need to move. Now." The guards, distracted and wet, waved them through. Cameras were already blinking in and out. No one noticed that Stitch wheeled Chris straight past the infirmary and toward the laundry chute. Beneath Greenford, through a loose tile behind the industrial dryer, lay a forgotten crawl space, an old drainage tunnel sealed off years ago, at least on paper. Stitch had spent months clearing it out, chipping at rusted bars, hiding tools in mop buckets and hollowed-out vents. They slipped in, dragging the stretcher behind them, and sealed the tile with a magnetic clasp from a stolen radio. The crawl space was tight, musty, and filled with decades of filth, but it was freedom. They moved fast. Storm water dripped from above, soaking them as they crawled through the narrow pipe. Rats scurried past. Chris gagged once from the stench of mildew and sewage, but kept going. 50 yards in, they reached the vertical shaft. Stitch pulled out the makeshift rope, knotted bedsheets, slick but strong. He went first, boots slipping on the damp stone. Chris followed, breathing hard, blood pounding in his ears. The shaft emptied out near the old maintenance shed on the outer wall. The storm had already shorted the yard lights. No guards, no dogs, just rain and shadows. They ran. Past the wall, through the tree line, over the ridge. Freedom. They had a stash waiting, clothes, a burner phone, and a beat-up pickup Stitch's cousin had left behind a week earlier. Within minutes, they were gone. As the sun rose behind them, Chris looked back once at the prison, a dark silhouette fading in the mirror. "Where to now?" Stitch asked, lighting a cigarette. Chris didn't answer right away. He thought of Jay, of the money, of everything he had buried, both in the woods and in himself. Then he said, "North. I've got a cabin waiting, and a plan." Stitch nodded. "You always got a plan." Chris just stared ahead, free, for now, but some debts don't stay buried forever.